So hi there, my name is Spencer, and I'm here joined by Omar and Linden, and we're here today to present our 2020 Virtual Quest presentation on internal carbon pricing. And so we each have really different majors and backgrounds, and so we're going to start by pointing those out to you. We're then going to then go into the science behind climate change and why it's important, kind of giving some detail on what SUNY Oswego has done in the realm of sustainability and what they plan on doing in the future. And then we're going to kind of tell how internal carbon pricing can help goals set by SUNY, pointing out how the chancellor and the governor goals kind of connect to internal carbon pricing, and kind of wrapping it all up by telling you how you can take action. And so like I said, my name is Spencer. I grew up about 40 minutes west of here in a small town. And when I grew up, I got to play outside a lot. Running around in the woods, climbing on trees was kind of my experience. So I'm finishing up my MBA in public accounting here, and I'm going to be heading down to New York City to work with KPMG. But I care about the environment because I always received that opportunity to play outside and to enjoy the environment growing up as a child. And I want to leave a place behind for my kids to be able to do the same.
Hi everyone, I'm Omar. I'm from Wolfish Bay, Namibia. My majors are political science and my minor is gender and women's studies. I'm very interested in environmental advocacy and policy. That's what I would like to go to graduate school for. And I believe that I'm interested in sustainable best practices and finding solutions to mitigate climate change, because I believe that fighting for the environment is a faceless fight. And the effects of climate change is seen on people long after the impacts of it. So I believe that we are the faces of the fight, and I would like to be at the forefront of it.
Hi, I'm Linden. I'm a senior biology major from Buffalo, not too far away from here. And I'm interested in sustainability because I'm a huge outdoor recreation enthusiast, and I love exploring the outdoors. And I want future generations to have access to the resources that we have now, whether it be an outdoor playground or fresh water. And so to begin, I'm going to talk a little bit about the science behind climate change and why we actually have concerns in the first place. I'm sure a lot of you guys know this information, but it never hurts to brush up on it. So to start, this is an image of the Keeling curve, which pretty much just shows the increase of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution. You can see the annual fluctuations, but the general trend is upward. So what is considered to be the safe threshold for carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is 350 parts per million, but we are currently sitting around 415 parts per million, which is quite above what that safe threshold is. And so a lot of implications of this extreme spike in carbon dioxide are in relation to things such as water levels increasing, more water scarcity worldwide, plenty of health implications, just a couple including respiratory diseases or Lyme disease, and also a large increase in natural disasters and how intense those natural disasters are. And while there are a lot of ecological implications that can affect humans, there's also going to be a lot of damage economically and in the financial sector. So by 2100, the global cost of climate change will exceed $69 trillion. And the US's economic damage due to climate change will become more or less 4.5% of our GDP by that same year. The economic impacts are also going to be a lot higher for low-income communities and communities that are less able to fight for themselves and to make the changes that we need to change to prevent this from happening in the first place. So another thing we need to take into consideration when talking about climate change and how to fight it is the social cost of carbon. And what the social cost of carbon is how much economic damage 1 metric ton of carbon creates in 1 year. So looking at this takes into consideration what we end up paying without actually seeing that on our bills, but what society will be faced with the burden of. And when tackling solutions as big as climate change, we need to be doing so in a very methodical way and understand where we are during the process. So here is a little diagram showing how to tackle big issues like climate change. As you can see at the top, you start with identifying what the risks even are. And I just went through those, and we know that that science is accurate and very well supported. And so now we believe that we are in the analysis state, which is in the bottom right, where we identify our options, we talk about the options, weigh out the pros and cons, and see why things are viable or why they're not viable. And we're hoping that today, after this presentation, we'll be able to shift more into the implementation stage, where we can actually test run these ideas and concepts and see if they actually work for our campus and community.
All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what SUNY Oswego has done to implement different strategies that can help us work towards reducing our carbon footprint on campus. So firstly, SUNY Oswego has renovated the Shinneman Center to meet the LEED Gold standards, and that's leadership in engineering and environmental design. And we did this by implementing the largest geothermal HVAC system in the state. We built about 240 geothermal wells, and that really signified the energy efficient standards that we have at Oswego and that we are going to work towards. This reduced the building's energy cost by about 12%, and this reduced the campus's overall emissions by about 33% as well, or with respect to the building, I'm sorry. So the Shinneman Center really showed that this was one of the first structural steps that SUNY Oswego is working towards to reduce our carbon footprints. And when we build new buildings on this campus, like we did with the village residential centers or townhouses and the Rice Creek Biology Center too, or field station, those also were designed to meet the LEED Gold standards. In the dining halls, due to student advocacy on campus, sustainability referendum was put out, and about 52% of the students voted to remove single-use plastics on campus. And this resulted in about removing about 324,000 single-use plastic cups a semester, as well as straws and plastic bags. And the auxiliary services, which is the department on campus that works with dining services, they also work towards reducing or implementing a discount for usable cups and instituting a number of zero waste events on campus. But most importantly, what is a pretty significant thing that our campus has done is become a signatory member of the ACU PCC. And if we look at the next slide, this highlights our commitment to sustainability on our campus. SUNY Oswego remains committed to being a leader in sustainability, improving the environment, and becoming a campus that has a deeper awareness of environmental and technological developments that can be instituted and especially facilitated by our students. And the university is therefore determined to cultivate this amongst the student body, to cultivate an essence of environmental stewardship so that students can understand this huge climate emergency we have at hand. And in our campus's pursuits of implementing these sustainable best practices to alleviate the effects of greenhouse gases, President Stanley signed the American Colleges and Universities President's Climate Commitment to demonstrate both regional and national sustainability leadership. Because we at SUNY Oswego, we want to model our campus as a way society can reduce its carbon footprint. And we will see how other SUNY campuses, especially the Chancellor and the Governor, has really kind of modeled this signatory membership that we have put forward, or this commitment that we have put forward for the entire state and for the entire SUNY campuses. So we've been a member since 2007, and that has set a mandate on our campus to become carbon neutral by 2050. And we'll talk a little bit more about this goal and how we can reach our carbon neutrality way sooner than 2050.
And so as with signing that commitment, we had a goal to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. So in 2012, we put forward our climate action plan, or SUNY Oswego put forward the climate action plan. And what this did was this set some strategies in place to help us reach that goal, to work towards that goal of climate neutral or carbon neutrality. And so as you can see by this figure, a lot of different strategies were implemented or designed to be implemented. Lake source geothermal was a big silver bullet kind of to this goal of carbon neutrality. But over the years, since 2012, some things have changed. One of the things that we're looking at now is implementing more solar on campus to help us reduce our carbon footprint. We don't see lake source geothermal as such a big silver bullet anymore. But as you can see by this figure, we didn't quite figure out how we were going to get to carbon neutral by 2050. There's still that gray area at the bottom that we're trying to figure out how to work in. And so we believe that internal carbon pricing is a strategy to help us get there. And so internal carbon pricing comes in many different shapes and forms. There's a lot of different ways that this can be implemented, especially on a college campus. And so we think that college campuses are a great place to implement policies like this because there's so much research to be done. There's such an educational component. We think that it would really benefit the college and the communities around the college by implementing a policy. So internal carbon pricing is twofold. One, it's meant to help curb behavior, at the same time kind of raising funds for internal carbon or greenhouse gas reducing projects on campus. So here are some different colleges that have implemented or pioneered internal carbon pricing strategies on campuses. All of these universities have taken different strategies upon themselves. ASU uses a carbon levy or a charge on airline tickets that are purchased. Smith College uses proxy pricing in their strategies. Yale, Stanford, Swarthmore all have pioneered different policies or ways to implement internal carbon pricing on campus. But because there's so much to be learned, we really think that we can put SUNY Oswego on top of this map and let SUNY Oswego become a leader in internal carbon pricing models. So one internal carbon pricing model that we think would fit really well on campus is called a proxy pricing or shadow pricing. And so this isn't putting a dollar amount that's costing the campus in that time. It's kind of more as a decision-making tool to help the campus make decisions when planning big renovations or capital projects on campus. So when we're doing those projects on campus, we already take into effect the life cycle cost of the project. Looking at this figure over on the side there, the chart, we already look at these bottom two numbers, the financial initial cost and the life cycle cost. When we're doing renovations and projects on campus, we take that into account already. But what we don't currently look at is that gray area, that social cost of carbon, partly because there's a lot unknown to this. It's difficult to calculate. But with best estimates, we can put a price on this and we can incorporate this into the designing and the planning that we're already doing on campus when we look for renovations. So an example of this would be the renovation of a sustainability office. We think that proxy pricing would be extremely helpful in this renovation. Through the use of tools that have been designed by Smith College and Harvard University, we can use those tools in our life cycle cost analysis to figure out what the best decision will be. And through the use of these tools and incorporating the social cost of carbon into the life cycle cost analysis, we can make the best educated decision for our campus and for the members of our community. And now this is just one model that we can use on campus, but Linden's going to share another model that we think would be extremely helpful for our university.
So the carbon levy is a little bit different than a proxy price in a couple ways. The proxy price that Spencer was discussing is more of a shadow price, like he said, and it is determined by looking at the cost of the project before, during, and after, etc. the project. A carbon levy is an actual price that is added on to purchases that emit high levels of carbon dioxide, and it's meant to curb spending and usage of purchases that do have high emissions. So if someone were to make a purchase that where a carbon levy is added on, the carbon tax is added on, then there'll be more money collected. And that money collected can be redistributed in the campus or in the community into various different funds or one fund. For example, we could begin a green fund that would collect money from the carbon levy, and then over time this money would accumulate and we could include it into green projects such as solar installations. Another way the money could be redistributed throughout the campus is by collecting it in a crisis fund or an emergency fund for times of crisis like we're in right now with the current pandemic. The figure on the right shows a prediction for a decrease in greenhouse gas emissions if different levels of carbon levies were to be implemented in the United States on how we electrify things. So the higher the price, the higher the carbon levy that you pay for emissions, the less likely you are to emit carbon dioxide. Pretty straightforward. One example that we could implement this on campus, if we move on to the next slide, is through campus purchasing. So the Student Association is the student government that funds all clubs and organizations on campus, and we have a lot. So the fund allocation process is quite long, and a lot of thinking goes into it because there are so many clubs and orgs that need to receive funding for the following years. So the clubs use the money allocated to them for various things, whether it be attending conferences, purchasing club apparel or gear, or if you're a club sport, maybe you need more equipment, attending I already said conferences, but matches and games, etc. Simply put, a lot of things are bought. So we think a quick way to curb emissions via our campus is to look at what we're buying and add a carbon tax onto things that are not sustainable. So to do this, we could create a committee through the Student Association, maybe on the budget committee, that oversees clubs and organizations' purchases. And purchases that don't meet a certain guidelines for carbon emissions would have a tax added to them. A very good example of this is if a club were to be buying new sports jerseys for their team. We could request or ask that the jerseys are made in the US out of organic materials, and so that we know they're locally sourced and made out of sustainable things. In addition, a lot of clubs buy things such as water bottles or pop sockets or phone cases, etc., to give away, to entice people to join the club and whatnot. We could add a carbon tax onto things like this to encourage clubs to buy perhaps less of a good quality thing rather than more of a lesser quality thing. And we hope that this would ultimately save money by not having clubs be buying so much every single year, but also curb our emissions through small purchases like this. Lastly, a lot of clubs and organizations hold events on campus that are catered by auxiliary services, and there are often disposable products at these catered events. So a tax could be added on to the events that have disposable products, such as plastic cups, napkins, disposable utensils, and this would hopefully encourage clubs and organizations to hold zero waste events, like the Sustainability Office has been trying to do a lot in the past year.
So another option for a carbon levy model would be an opt-in model. And so this might be similar to what you might see when you purchase an airline ticket. So the option to offset your greenhouse gas emissions associated with that flight. So it's something that you opt into, you make the decision to do that, and you get that kind of good feeling by doing so. So an individual would have the option to offset their emissions in connection with some behaviors, and some that we've picked out on campus are commuting, air travel, and the mini fridges and allowed space heaters. And so the commute, individuals, mostly staff, would calculate their commute to campus and the greenhouse gases that are created in connection with that commute, and they would make a donation to the Green Fund to kind of offset those emissions. Another way would be a flat rate on air travel, international or domestic, and this would be not only for conferences, but also the potential for students traveling for study abroad, and also mini fridges and space heaters that could be subject to an opt-in carbon charge. And so the funds raised from these opt-in carbon levies would be used to help offset the emissions from these behaviors. So our hope is that we would be able to not only increase funds to help offset greenhouse gas emissions through projects on campus, but also help curb that behavior. So maybe getting people to make a greener commute, air travel less, or maybe share a fridge with some coworkers. And now Omar is going to kind of explain how all these internal carbon pricing models align with some of the goals that have been set forth by SUNY and the governor.
Thank you, Spencer. So the governor has set forward a clean energy goal or vision for the state to reduce its energy consumption by about 185 trillion BTUs, British thermal units, by 2025. And so he set this forward by urging the state to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030, and 100% to become 100% renewable energy efficient or depend on renewable energy by 2040. And so Chancellor Johnson of the SUNY system set forward what I like to call a green energy security sustainability vision to kind of be on par with the governor or push SUNY to meet the governor's new mandate or call to action. And in a State of the University System address in 2018, the Chancellor amplified the governor's clean energy vision for New York State. And in conjunction with the governor's executive orders, the Chancellor presented a clean energy roadmap for SUNY. This was an aggressive and bold mandate, or like a vision plan for all these campuses to lead towards pushing the campuses to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions. And as the largest public university system in the world and in the state, SUNY acknowledges its tremendous responsibility to invest in clean technology and clean energy efficiency and lead the way to those. So this makes SUNY Oswego's 2007 ACUPCC commitment even more paramount, as it positioned our campus to work towards reducing our carbon footprint well ahead of the Chancellor and the governor's call to action. It's also important to know that no funds will be taken from the tuition, and all investments directed for academic and student programs will remain in place. And so a little bit more on the funding. Currently, SUNY Oswego, and also it's important to know that currently SUNY Oswego aims to reduce or become carbon neutral by 2050. Now, the governor has called for greenhouse gas emissions to be reduced 40% BTU by 2030 and reach 100%, like I said, by 2040. So this means SUNY Oswego is about 10 to 20 years off target, and we have to implement more initiatives to be on par with the governor's call and the chancellor's mandate or roadmap. So that's where initiatives like the internal carbon pricing can come into play to get us on par and to bridge that gap of the 10 to 20 years. So how do we do this, or how can we do this, tap into the funds? And that's because there is funding available, because the Chancellor has put forward a SUNY fund from capital investments in New York State and from partnering with other agencies. This will create incentives to help campuses finance their work that would result in energy cost savings. And there can be mechanisms where implementing internal carbon pricing can make a good case to tap into these funds, or to work with projects that align with the characteristics of projects that will be needed to be approved for capital investment funds. And this is subsidized through the stakeholders in New York State, like NYPIRG and the Department of Energy in the state as well. And SUNY has already reduced its carbon footprint by about 250 metric tons, saving us about 90 million in energy cost savings up to 2019. And if we look at the next slide, it's important to know that this fund while it is available for long-term projects that develop new building efficiencies like the Shineman Center and energy management best practices, we believe that carbon pricing can be an energy management best practice, and it can garner solutions that's needed for greenhouse gas reduction. And if we couple it with energy efficient capital projects like solar or like the Shinneman Center, carbon pricing can help SUNY Oswego achieve the reduction in energy emissions and be carbon neutral by 2040. So the Clean Energy Roadmap challenges campuses to enshrine the following principles or goals with their sustainability efforts. And if we look at the goals, we can see why a case can be made for internal carbon pricing. Because the Chancellor has asked that all renewable energy comes from grid source electricity, if we implement solar power along with carbon pricing, this can meet that goal. The Chancellor wants us to achieve 40% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by about 2030. And again, internal carbon pricing can get us on that path. She also wants us to explore the feasibility of a microgrid that uses a lot of the renewable energy from solar powers too. And this can be used in the event of an emergency, like Linden said, like the pandemic that we're experiencing right now with the coronavirus. And construction must be using net zero carbon emission standards from 2019 onwards. And SUNY Oswego has already done this by building the Shinneman Center and indicating that we'll continue doing this moving forward. Lastly, she would like SUNY to provide SUNY campuses with training to enter the clean energy workforce. And if we train our campus staff or students to implement models like internal carbon pricing, that will create a holistic facility or clean energy management workforce that will go into New York State coming from SUNY campuses. So carbon credits provides the net zero approach that we need for in order to achieve the goals that the mandate is asking for.
So along with everything that Omar was just discussing, there are many other reasons also why we should be considering carbon pricing. We recognize that there are so many different ways to combat climate change, and this is just one of them. And granted, these are only a few options regarding carbon pricing. This is just scraping the surface. There are so many other avenues we could go down, but we wanted to touch on the ones that are the most applicable to SUNY Oswego and the ones that are, we think, the most within reach. Carbon pricing gives us resources that we need and will need for the future to construct new buildings, but also in times of crisis like we are currently in. And it also would help set up initiatives that we may already have going, such as promoting solar or planting trees on campus or constructing more LEED certified buildings. A lot of this is also about changing behavior. Behavior is a very difficult thing to change. You can change laws and policies all you want, but an individual's behavior is hard to mess with. And so trying to implement sustainable practices into everyday life, such as adding a carbon price onto purchases that we make or renovations that we make, can really help shift our culture in a sustainable direction, which is very needed right now, sooner rather than later as well.
And lastly, implementing an internal carbon pricing model can help accelerate the university or government's effort to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, like we've previously mentioned. But SUNY Oswego must maintain its head start with respect to the Governor and Chancellor's goals to push our campus to leverage its academic and research capabilities and center it around the development of clean energy technology solutions. And we believe that internal carbon pricing is not only an aspect to these solutions that provides a net zero approach, but internal carbon pricing allows us to incorporate the social cost of carbon dioxide emissions. And that is a mandatory precursor people should keep in mind when working on any new technologies and solutions that seeks to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions.
And so this is just the first of many conversations that we hope to have about internal carbon pricing. If you're interested in reaching out, learning more, discussing, asking questions, literally anything regarding sustainability or specifically internal carbon pricing, feel free to reach out to our whole office in its entirety at sustainability@oswego.edu, or we also have our individual emails listed below. We're always willing and happy to have conversations about things like this, and we really can't wait to see how the campus moves forward and how the community moves forward as well. Thank you for spending your time with us today, and happy Quest 2020.